Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. So, continuing with the DBX-10, as I promised, as soon as the new parts came in, I was going to get back to this truck, and the new parts came in. I just put these on. I didn't think it was something worthy of showing you the whole process. I actually bought 2 pairs of those. I figured I'd better, since it does seem to be a fairly easily breakable item, that I better have a spare set. I'm not sure which of those is the part number. This is what the label looks like. This is the front of the packaging. I got these off of Maker Fire, same place I bought the truck, same place I got my 104 001, the 10 scale all-wheel drive, same place I got the 5mm carbon kit, same place I just got the big brother to this, the DBX-07, and that is going to be going out to run today, and I'm going to have more videos of that up directly. So today, or this morning at least, what I'm doing is I put on the pair of these so I can mount the wing again. And I am doing a shock upgrade. I'm not really fond of these shocks. The preload adjusters didn't seem to be threaded correctly. They're the same threads, but they seem like they're not sized correctly, like there was an issue with the way these things were tapped, and they're very loose. They do hold place, but it's just didn't seem right. They also don't have O-rings, so they aren't, that's an issue as well. In any event, the springs are not a standard 1/10 size spring and shock, so you can't switch them for anything in that class. All the springs I've found that fit are from Losey's 1/10 scale short course truck, all-wheel drive short course truck, and that's kind of an odd-sized shock absorber. Nobody else runs that same spring on their 1/10 scale vehicles. It's kind of a Losey thing, and so you don't have the range. Whereas, for example, for 1/10 scale trucks and buggies, I have these, I have these, I have these, and I have these. All of these springs will fit the shocks that I'm about to put on here, and you can too. It's Proline's Pro-Spec shocks. They are pre-assembled. They I don't recall them being filled with oil, so they're not fully assembled. You've got to take the caps off, fill them with your choice of fluid, and put them back together again. But they're mostly assembled. And these are for short course, and this is a set for the front, part number 6308-30, and they make a longer version for rear. You can also do things like put spacers on the shock shaft, both outside and or inside the shock body, to change the total amount of stroke that the shock has. You can do that with any shock, and thus you can adjust it for the particular vehicle. I have a set of fronts, I have a set of rears. I'm going to be putting these on, and I'm probably going to be setting aside the stock springs and using something that I think will work well for this. If you recall, this was the softest spring that I had that fit these shocks. That was one of the Losey springs, and even with their softest one, the truck was just way oversprung. It was very hard to drive because on rough surfaces the suspension couldn't react quickly enough. Off of jumps, the shocks acted like springs to launch the vehicle out of control. Even, you know, using on or off throttle to tweak the car's flight angle in the air. I still was spending most of my time wrecking and picking the car up and flipping it back over onto its wheels again. It just didn't work. And so this is, I think, the best way to go is just to replace the shocks altogether with a true 1/10 scale shock, because that's what this vehicle is a 10th scale all-wheel drive car. So that is what I'm going to be doing right now. I'm not going to show you every step of the shock build process because it's boring. And you can watch any of my build videos and learn everything you need to about shock absorber building there. These are decent, very decent shocks. They have their issues. They're not the best. If you really want the best set of 1/10 scale shocks, get a set of Team Associated short course 1/10 scale short course 2-wheel drive shock absorbers, or get a set of all-wheel drive 1/10 scale buggy shock absorbers. Again, stay away from the short course truck shocks, other than these, of course, that are specific to Losey's short course truck or the Techno short course truck. Both of those have non-10 scale shocks. They are larger diameter bores, much heavier springs. The Techno 1/10 scale short course truck shocks are closer to being an 1/8 scale shock absorber than a 10th scale, and they are very beefy. But that truck is also considerably heavier than this. So that's the main thing you've got to take into account. You're trying to find something that's going to work for the weight class. Damping, if you don't think you're getting enough damping, you can always just up the viscosity of the fluid you put into your shocks and get more damping. The main thing is being able to get a spring rate that's going to work for the vehicle, and the only way to do that is to go with 10th scale. Even if you have to go to the higher end of the spring, the range that's available, that's fine. Again, this is the same size spring as what you're going to find on any current day 10th scale all-wheel drive buggy, and the springs are going to be interchangeable. So I'm going to go ahead, pause the video. I'm going to start setting up shocks. I'm going to let you, any anomalies I come across, anything special I have to do to tweak these, like if I put some spacers in them or something like that to change stroke, I'll go over all of that so you can see it. Do you find these videos to be helpful, useful to you? Then please help me keep this channel going by donating. Click the link up here and you can donate safely through PayPal on either a one-time or a monthly basis, your choice. Never count on anything to be 100% right out of the box. I'll give you an example. Proline is definitely a quality manufacturer. The spacer at one end of the stack was super tight. I mean, almost to the point of the piston shaft barely being able to move through it. I took it out, used a couple of little rat tail files, and enlarged the hole a little bit. Now that is not a sealing issue because the seal is done by the actual silicone seal. This is just something for alignment. So now everything moves nice and smooth. So you know, it's just something you need to watch for. Always check stuff. Never you know, count on a differential to work the way it should. If you guys recall, the DBX-10, I think it was, that had the differentials that were really chomping, and it was because when they were assembling them, they were putting in too many shims, and the gears were binding, and that would have torn the gears apart under heavy loads and high speed. And so taking it apart, putting in the right number of shims, testing it, you know, basically, you know, like kind of massaging it to make everything work through with a little bit of trial and error, is absolutely important and essential if you want to have things work well and you want longevity out of them. So, you know, for example, this little issue, both front shocks had that same problem. It must have just been the way those plastic parts came off the line. You know, maybe they, you know, weren't, I'm not going to speculate as to why, but they weren't working properly. And so a little bit of work and they were fixed. Now, acquiring parts over time is always a good idea. If you get rid of a car, like let's say you bust up a car, don't throw it in the trash, strip it down, take every viable piece on it, even little plastic pieces, and put them away. And I'll give you an example. I'm using a set of low-C springs. I think I'm going to start with the reds in the rear. The springs that I had on the stock shocks were a 3.3 pound spring. I'm putting in a the reds are 2.6. So I'm going down 0.7 pounds. Little, you know, more than half a pound difference. And that's where I'm going to kind of start and, you know, see what the sag is, how the car sits, etc., and decide if that's going to at least be what I'll take out for the first drive. But as you can see, I've got the shock collar down pretty low. That's because of the length of these springs versus the size of the shock absorbers. These are the stock shock spring footer. I forget the exact name, doesn't matter. There are different sizes. For example, associated off-road kits used to come with 3 different sizes, low, medium, and high. And so I saved those parts, and I'm swapping out the low ones that come on these shocks for a pair of these, which are the tall ones. Let me pull one off here so you can visually see the difference. So there's our 2 shock perches, and as you can tell, the spring, you know, that's about a good centimeter difference right there. And so that if I didn't have these on, the shock collar would be a lot further down and I would have very little adjustment available to me. So little things like that, you know, or that you just kind of pick up over the years and accumulate. So I've already switched one of the rear shocks. Now I'm going to put the other one on and finish building the front shocks. I'm using the same weight of fluid, front and rear. I'm using 27.5. It's got, with the pistons that come with these, it's got very good damping at that level of viscosity, but at the same time it moves well. I am modifying the setup sheet that I made for the DBX-7 to work for the DBX-10. I'll try to put these out somewhere. I needed somewhere to record what shock fluid I'm using and which springs I'm using, so I've got a record to work from. So if in a month I decide that I'm not happy with the damping and I want to rebuild these shocks, I'll know what I put in them, because you can't tell just by looking at the fluid what weight it is. Other than that, nothing unusual has come up about this process. I do like these shocks for various reasons, and I also have issues with them. I do like that they are emulsion. In other words, they have a screw with a hole in the cap, and when you build them, you bleed out as much fluid as you want by compressing the shock absorber, letting that fluid seep out, and then putting in the cap screw to seal the shock absorber. That allows you to very precisely control the amount of rebound that the shock is going to have. You can literally set it up to have a dramatic slowdown at a particular height, and almost bring the shock to a dead stop before it hits its bottom. So I'm going to continue off camera and bring you back in a couple moments. Okay, so I've got everything assembled. Let's do a little testing. So if I drop it, so that's a pretty decent amount for the front. Let me change the camera angle. Okay, so what I'm testing is how much sag there is in the suspension, because we don't want this to be oversprung. So that's our front. That's very decent. And that's our rear. So about the same amount, more or less. It's a little stiffer in the front, a little softer in the rear. I think this is good for testing, first round. Decent choice in springs. Might need to go a little stiffer in the rear, but we'll see. Take it for a test first, and just to show you, basically 27.5 TLR fluid in both. Springs are both TLR springs. 2.9 pounds front, 2.6 rear, orange and red. So just getting started on all the numbers for this car, so I can keep track of that. So now I need to put the wing on. Oh, also I just realized I did this whole test without the battery weight in it. So I really should test that before I do the wing, because I might need to swap those springs right away, at least the front ones. I mean the rear ones. You know, the biggest effect is in the rear. I do think I'm going to bump those up a little bit. Okay, as it turns out, these reds are the stiffest rear 110 that I have at the moment. I may order something, but before I do that, I've got this set of Pro-Line springs, the purples. Pro-Line purple is 2.8 pounds, so I'm not going up a lot, just 0.2 pounds, but that's per side, so I'm really going up almost a half a pound total for the rear, and I think that's probably a good compromise for testing purposes. So I'm going to swap the springs real quick, and it'll be off to the track, or off to the park. Okay, so let's do the bounce test again. Here's our rear. So we've got good ride height. I think it's riding a little bit higher. Now, I want to make sure that you guys understand something, okay? Our preload adjusters on our shock absorbers, you do not use, like when I said, okay, I'm going to switch these springs because I don't think it's stiff enough back here. Some of you might, I'm sure most of you wouldn't, because you guys know this stuff, I hope. Some of you might have said, why don't you just crank down on these, you know? That does not make the spring stiffer. The spring is as stiff as the spring is, period. Compressing it does not make the spring stiffer. It just adds load to it. In other words, you use the preload adjusters to adjust ride height, not to make the spring stiffer. The only way to make the spring stiffer is to remove it and put in an actually stiffer spring. So once I've got the balance where I want it, okay, and I feel that I've got a decent amount of sag, yet, you know, for the amount of action, I think I've got a good spring going here. At that point, I can measure my front and rear ride height, and If it's a little low in the rear or a little high in the rear, I can adjust the preload adjuster up or down. That will adjust ride height, but it doesn't make the spring any stiffer. Just FYI. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel. If you click the bell icon, you'll receive notifications every time I launch a new video. Thank you for watching.